Hi, I'm Anastasia Chatzka, a fashion designer with over 20 years of experience and a sewing educator. And I'm really excited you're here to share another sewing adventure with me today. Welcome to Sew Anastasia, and today we are going to go over how to work with beaded sequined fabric. This has been a really big request, so we are finally getting to it. Today I'm going to take this dress in and I'm going to show you how to work with all the extra beads and sequins that are in the seam allowance, because you can't just sew over it with the sewing machine. You will break all of your needles and ruin your sewing machine. So keep watching for a detailed explanation on how to work with beaded sequined fabric. If you're not already a subscriber to Sew Anastasia, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that way you know when all my new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing and watching my sewing adventures. Also, I'm now teaching virtual and in-person sewing classes. If you'd like to sign up, make sure you sign up at sewanastasia.com. Finding one of these dresses in the thrift store is like a diamond in the rough. I get so excited when I find one because it's really hard to buy dresses like this in an actual store right now. And if you did, it would be in the designer section and it would be thousands of dollars. That is why thrifting is so amazing, and learning how to sew and knowing how to sew is so amazing as well. Because we can take this $10 to $20 dress and make it into a dress that's worth thousands. But they're never the right size. They have a very 80s, early 90s vibe to them with big shoulders, big shoulder pads. They're always a little boxy and they just don't fit right. So it's time to take them in. So today I'm going to be showing you how to take them in, and it's a little tricky. You're going to need a few supplies to be able to take in or work with this beaded sequin fabric. You're going to need your zipper foot so we can get really close to that edge. We're also going to need our seam ripper if we're gonna have to rip open the seam or rip apart a lot of the beads and sequins. We're also gonna need some scissors. You're going to need a hand sewing needle, and you're going to need some matching thread. Since I'm working with a beaded sequin fabric, there's a special way I need to be able to sew my seams. And the way I'm gonna show you this today is by taking in this vintage beaded dress. So we're gonna take in the side seams on it, and I'm gonna go over the process of how you work with this beaded sequin fabric when creating a seam. This is what the dress looks like right now. So we're gonna need to take it in on the side seams. So we are going to take in all of this fabric here on the sides. And as you can see, it is covered in beads and sequins and fake pearls. The first thing we're gonna do to start this process is rip open the side seams. And then we're gonna place it on a dress form inside out and pin it up to see how much we need to take it in. If you don't have a dress form, no worries. You can totally try this on yourself and pin it up as well. You might need a friend for this process. It makes it a little easier. Now grab your seam ripper and we are going to open up the side seams on this dress. And if you're just working with flat fabric, then you can skip this step and move ahead. You'll notice there's no beads or sequins in the seam, which is great, so we can go ahead and just rip this open. Starting it is always the hardest, because you don't want to rip your fabric. Seam ripping these dresses is going to be fairly easy because they keep the beads out of the seams. Sometimes the sequins get overlapped in the seams, which is totally fine because they're not as thick and heavy, and the needle can go right through the sequin, but it can't go through the beads. So that's why we have to make sure there's no beads in the seams when we're making our final product. So we have some sequins coming up, and we are just going to keep ripping like normal, and you're gonna notice that they're in the seam. So you'll see that it just goes all the way over to the seam, but they've taken most of it out of the actual seam. I'm just gonna keep seam ripping this all the way up to the armpit. I've seam ripped it from the hem all the way up to 1 inch or 2 below the armpit because we're just taking it in on the sides. We have one side of the dress fully seam ripped open, and that was so easy. Now we just need to do the exact same thing to the other side. We have finished seam ripping and the sides are completely open now. Now we are ready to turn it inside out, put it on the dress form, and pin it up. I have the dress on the dress form and it's turned inside out. So you can see we have the inside of the dress here. We're gonna put these 2 layers together and put some pins in it and take it in the desired amount, and I'm gonna make this dress fit the dress form here. And I'm just going to be pinning the sheer embroidered beaded layers so that way I can really see what's going on with them when I'm working with them later. We can always take in the lining fabrics after. Don't be afraid to put too many pins in this section because we want to replicate a seam line, because we really want to know how it's going to be fitting, and you really want to make sure that you're not pulling it and you don't have any pull lines in your fabric. If you do, you're pulling it too tight. You just want everything to lay really nice and smooth. You can see I have the pins starting at the armpit and going all the way down to the hem. This is the seam that I opened up. Now you're gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing to the other side. Now that we have the pins in the side seam, we know exactly where we want our new seam line to be. So we're gonna grab our chalk pen or your fabric marking tool, and we're gonna mark right where the pins are on both sides. So that way we can remove the pins, and then we still have a line knowing where our seam line is gonna be. So that way we can remove all the other beads. It's really important to be precise with this because we don't want to have a bunch of missing beads on the side of your dress. We want the beadwork to go directly to the seam. So this is a very, very fine precision detail of where the seam's going to be and where the beads are going to start and end. So we are just marking right where the pins are on top, and then we are going to flip it. And I want you to mark where the pin is on this side as well. So we can see all the bulky beads in here and sequins where the pin is. And this is where our new seam line is going to be, so we have to get rid of all those beads and sequins that are at that seam line. Now that we have it all marked up, we can remove our pins. Now open up your dress and lay it flat, and grab your ruler, and we are going to connect all those dots to create our new seam line. I have my ruler lined up with all the dots. Make sure it's nice and even, and just take your marking pen and work it down the ruler, and make sure you're marking your fabric. Now when we remove that, you can see our new seam line here. Flip your ruler the opposite way for doing the top of the body. There we go, we have our seam line. Now go ahead and do the exact same thing to the other side of your side seam. Now is the time-consuming part where we need to remove all the beads and all the embellishment that's going to be within our seam allowance. So grab your seam ripper and let's get busy. Now what we need to do is take away all the beads that are on this blue line or a ½ inch out from that seam line. Anything else we're just gonna cut off so you don't have to waste your time seam ripping it. But these beads right here, they fall right into my sewing line, so these all have to be removed. And I say a ½ inch because the ½ inch is going to be my seam allowance. So whatever your seam allowance is, you don't want any beads or sequins in it. Okay, let's do this. So just carefully start ripping your beads out. And I'm gonna keep all my beads in case I need to hand sew any back on by the seams to fill it in. So if you have some sequins in your seam line, depending on how thick they are, you can just sew over these real easy. You just absolutely cannot sew over the glass beads or the plastic beads. So any of these little flat discs you can try sewing over, and when you're sewing, if you feel like it's not working, then you're gonna have to go back and take them out. But I think these are gonna be just fine. So you can see I've removed these and there's just some threads there. I'm gonna leave these threads. I do not wanna pull them because I don't want all the beads to unravel. So I just want what's in that seam line. Here I've got some of those plastic pearly beads. We need to get those out of here. These will definitely break the needle in the sewing machine. These are really on there. If you can't get them from the front, you can also turn this over and just break a seam on the back of the dress. These beads are so secure. They are not going anywhere. I really thought they'd come off a lot easier. Now, different companies secure things differently, and these ones are very secure, which is great, but not great for taking in. I've accomplished about 6 inches of removing the beads, so let's take a look at it and go over it to make sure you feel comfortable with removing the rest of the beads out of all the other seams. So starting at the bottom here, these are sequins, so I'm gonna leave those. That's a little sequin, so we left that. I removed all of the bugle and seed beads that were all along here. And then there were pearls and bugle seed beads all along here, which I removed. Oh, there were also some pearls here that I removed. And then going down, I stopped here because that was about my 6 inches. So you'll notice I have all my beads removed out of the 1/2 inch seam allowance up to here. And you're gonna notice all these extra little threads here from holding on the beads. Don't worry about those. We can go back and remove those later if we can see any on the outside of our garment. Now is where the labor-intensive, tedious work really kicks in, because we have to do this to both sides and on both pieces of fabric on both sides. So this is gonna take a while. So put on some good music, grab your seam ripper, and let's continue seam ripping beads. We did it! All of the beads have been removed from the seam allowance. So you can see there are no beads by the seam line all the way up to the top of the dress, and same with over here. All of those beads have been removed. Check out all of these beads that we took off the dress. Now it's time to sew it back together where we have our chalk marks. So we're gonna set up the regular sewing machine, we're gonna put on the all-purpose zipper foot, and we are gonna sew them up and see how it looks. I have my dress inside out and I'm placing right sides together. You can see my blue chalk line, so I know exactly where to sew. Make sure you're lining up your chalk lines so they match. For instance, I'm taking off more fabric on my back panel than I am my front panel, so that way my sides seam lined up better. When you're pinning it, make sure you're going in and then out of the fabric. Also, if you notice you're going through any beads while you're doing this, it's time to remove those, because we are going to be sewing right where that chalk line is, and we do not want to hit a bead and break it and break our needle, poke out our eyeball. Oh my gosh, you never know what could happen. You want to be really careful. I also recommend wearing glasses or protective eye goggles while you're doing this next step. Now that we're all pinned up, let's head over to the sewing machine. I have my all-purpose zipper foot and I have it clipped onto the left-hand side. I also have my needle moved all the way over to the left, so that way I can get really, really close to the beads and where I have removed the beads. You want to be really, really careful when you're doing this. I even suggest using your hand wheel quite a bit just to make sure you're not going to be sewing over any beads, and also just keep checking and making sure you're clear and you're good to go. And if you need to, while you're going, you can remove a bead or two. Don't forget to back stitch. We want this seam to be nice and secure. This is just a regular straight stitch. So just carefully work your way all the way down the side of the dress, checking your seam as you go. And cut. Now do the exact same thing to the other side. We did it. We took in the sides of the dress with all of this heavy beading and sequin on it, and we had no problems at all because we removed all the beading and sequin from the seams before we sewed up the seams, and it sewed up just like that. So you can see how nice this seam looks. The beading is going right up to the seam, but it's not inside the seam, making it bulky, and we've successfully taken it in. The blue that's on the fabric is just that water-soluble fabric marker, so I can just hit that with some water and that's gonna disappear, and we're gonna have a beautiful new dress to wear. If you're noticing that you have any bald spots on your side seam, hopefully you saved your beads and you can go back with your hand sewing needle and sew on a few beads to fill in those areas. You're also going to want to grab some fabric glue or some sort of adhesive for fabric, and we're going to turn the dress inside out, and anywhere you see a little loose thread from undoing the beads, I want you to put a little dab of glue there, so that way we know they're not going to unravel when we're out dancing and having a great time on town. You don't want to leave a trail of beads behind. So you'll notice where I ended the bead seam ripping right here by this seam. So I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of this adhesive, just a little bit, and I'm just going to rub it on that thread right there, so that way it's not going to continue to come undone. So anywhere you see little spots like that, don't be afraid to just put a little bit of adhesive there. Also, if your dress had a lining in it, now's a great time to go ahead and sew back up that lining. Remember, if you took in the outside of your dress, you're also going to want to take in your lining. Here's the dress all taken in. It is fitting so much better now that we've taken in the side seams on the dress. All of that tedious ripping of the beads and the sequins is done, and now we can wear the dress. This dress has been sitting in my upcycling pile for a while since I was in New York City a few years ago to see Bikini Kill, which was amazing. And I love thrifting in Brooklyn. There's so many great places to go thrifting there. This dress I got at a thrift store where you could buy everything by the pound. What? Well, of course, this one was a little more expensive because it's heavy with all the beads on it. So I've been dying to take it in, and today was the day. We did it. If you have any questions or comments on how to sew with beaded sequin fabric, leave it down below and I will get back with you as soon as I can. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, give it some applause, and leave a comment down below on your favorite part. Also, I would love to see your projects, so make sure you tag me in them so that way I can reshare them with everyone else and keep everyone inspired. And if you want to stay inspired, make sure you check me out on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and all those fabulous social media websites, so that way we can stay connected and inspired. And don't forget, I'm now teaching virtual sewing lessons and sewing lessons in person, and you can sign up for those at sewanastasia.com. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!